Still stuck in traffic. Frode is not stuck in traffic. Frode is with us.
I am stuck in, well, I was. It was a bit ridiculous, but anyway, hi guys.
Sorry, Adam and I were just discussing, he very kindly, I CC'd you on the post, I sent you that data set of ACM hypertext citation data.
Yeah, no, I was just agreeing with you, Mark. So for the bit that's not on the recording, there is an opportunity related to a conference coming up that we can't really discuss publicly yet. But one of the ideas that Mark and I talked about earlier today is relating back to what we're talking about binding. So that in a normal BibTeX, if it's an article, it says at article blah blah or at book blah blah. But if it's part of a proceeding, it says at proceeding and then it has the identity of the proceeding. So we should be able to thread together. So virtually somehow, someone can start with any proceeding document and then magically expand that to include the whole conference. So we have an opportunity here to present ideas for how naturally BibTeX in Visual Meta can be expanded to be really useful for this particular kind of documentation.
And I think that's entirely congruent with the sort of discussion we had just now about the fact that, okay, well, if you have this visualization and you can link through to the document, and if you have the document, you can open that up. And if not, you can have, you know, a DOI or something, a resolvable reference to it as a means of exploration. And another thing that came up talking to Fred when we talk about the bindings is the fact that for some papers, they actually occur in multiple bindings because it might be in a journal or a conference. Then they might go into a book that's a collection on a theme or something. And all these are different vectors of discovery for readers. So it might be useful to know that this article that you just read, so I've got some in there from Memex to something, which is the 1992 compendium of stuff about the, well, the Memex.
Memex hypertext?
Sorry? Yeah, that's it. Yeah. And there's one in there, one of Ted's ones that I followed around, and it started somewhere else, but you can't find that. That was done in 72, and Brunel lost their copy. I think they had the only paper copy and they lost it. But you know what you could do. So if you discover it through the book, the notion of the binding could also be that this is also in another binding, which is yet another way. Hi, Jerry, which is yet another vector of discovery. So I think there's something really, really useful and interesting, and it's entirely congruent with this notion of the visual meta being the safe, citable sort of referencing resource within the document.
I'm looking at the in proceedings ID for just a random thing here. And when I try to resolve that in Google, it does the maths for me because it has a slash in it. It's like an equation. But yeah, sorry, Jerry, we're just talking about, we have an opportunity for maybe being a part of a conference to have visual meta at the back of conference papers, so we can then add specific metadata for conference type papers, including how they connect and things like that. So that's an interesting opportunity.
Sounds good. Yeah.
Yeah, it's exciting. It hasn't been even properly discussed yet, but there is a chance. So I would really appreciate the brains in this group. There was another thing that came up. Let me just go on the website to see how we, I'm just going to click to a page. Right, so we decided to use for date, where is it now? ISO 8601. But when it comes to formatting the author names, what is there an ISO, or how should we just write that? Should we just write last name, comma, followed by first name, period, or what it should be?
Is this in the visual meta?
Yeah, I'm just trying to find out, because currently we have delimited by comma and delimited by period between author names.
Well, the period should only, the period is only used if the first name is abbreviated, if the forename is abbreviated. And there's actually a richer structure because you have to have prenominals and postnominals. Because I could be Dr. Fritz von something the third junior, and it has to cope with that. And BibTeX does have notions that deal with that.
And just say it.
With an Esquire on the end too. You never know. You could have gone for a law degree after.
but I mean, the thing is that this is a known problem with dealing with names, and actually BibTeX does have a structure, but we can massage that in.
But you see, we have a page here with just the introduction boilerplate text.
Mm-hmm.
So just tell me.
Well, off the top of my head, I need to go and look. I need to go and look it up, and I can sort of write it down for you. But I mean, yeah, that's a known and defined thing, at least certainly in one of the flavors of name definition in BibTeX. And I think we're going down the route of last name first, and then all the prenominals and postnominals appropriately stacked behind them, which seems to be the most common form.
But is it so that because I've only used BibTeX a long time ago and writing papers, and then it required quite a lot of hand holding. You edited it yourself and fixed all the problems. We need to be a bit stricter if it should be automatic, because there will be no person fixing all the mistakes here. So it could be the case that we need to be even stricter than the BibTeX recommendations, if you get what I mean here.
I think the thing to bear in mind is you're absolutely right, Adam. One of the problems is a lot of the early tools, are still knocking around. It's the classic web problem. Is you get this first mover advantage because you've been clicked on more times. But so a lot of the early tools didn't really understand their pre-Unicode, and there was all sorts of problems associated with that. Broadly, they think have now gone away. So for the baseline we're starting from, if necessary, we may need to say that, but we're assuming you're using a UTF or better data stream or something, so we can use accented characters and other stuff. I'm not quite sure how double byte languages.
And if you have multiple authors, do you separate them by the string and?
Yes, yeah.
Is that the only way to do it?
No, there are multiple ways to do it, but the main thing is. My personal view is, although there are multiple flavors, we should choose one. That because if you think about all the things we're wanting to write on the back of this, so that things have got to go in and pass this. So if something that didn't know about BibTeX has now got to do it, let's not make their life more difficult. I mean, if you just say this is what Visual Meta looks like, these are the rules. The fact that it's based on BibTeX and is valid BibTeX doesn't mean it's all of BibTeX. So actually having flavors, I don't think benefits it. It will annoy a small bunch of people who happen to use the version we've not chosen.
But it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter, because the opportunity that we may have here, we dictate this.
Yeah, exactly.
In collaboration with our potential partners, but in the introduction boilerplate text for Visual Meta, we specify this. So I've been the link that I just put in the chat, I just found that on the internets. And I'm thinking maybe we just do it as simple as we say, you write your name as you normally would from beginning to end, Frode Alexander Hegland, none of this Hegland Alexander weirdness. And then you have a huge elimination there. Maybe not period, because you could have a period at Peter, as you said, as part of your name. They've even suggested soft brackets here and all kinds of weirdness.
Well, one of the things you need to bear in mind, well, we all need to bear in mind, that's not you, but all of us, is, for everyone who's just called, Joe B. Smith, there are people who have names where you just cannot, so there's a guy who turns up in the hypertext, so he's called Van Dyke Paranak, and I've seen him cited as Van Dyke Paranak, as Paranak. Yeah, and then all the sorting goes out the window. So it's actually another thing that's quite important to do because this affects sorting. The last name affects sorting, and actually carries an impact beyond that, which at a human level we think, because we tend to abstract that away. We can see, oh, that's just got in the wrong place. So we can look into that. I mean, as I say, I think these are known problems. They may not have neat solutions. I see Peter's got his hand up.
Okay, putting my programmer hat on for a minute. One thing we have to do is make sure we have some escaping mechanism built in, because sure enough, you're going to have somebody whose last name is White and Smith as his actual last name, which is going to trip the system up. So you have to have some way of escaping it so it knows that that and that's a part of his name isn't actually the field separator. The other thing that I'm thinking is maybe what we could do is work out an API for a visual meta builder. And the idea is it would be some little software object would have methods on it. And one method could be add prenominal. Another one could be add last name. Another one could be, add new author, which would shift the state. And the output of the entire thing could be your visual meta text. And it could also spit out a machine readable data structure for whichever language. And then we get a GitHub repository for the visual meta builder, and people could glue that into their projects, and they wouldn't have to think about, all they'd need to think about is calling the builder in add last name, add middle name, add alternate name, add degree, add current job title, associate dates with job title. We think of what the operations are that you, as the author putting together the citation, would be thinking of as being the most natural without having to do any reference to the underlying data format, and make those the methods on the builder object. And then that could be exposed in any language. People could come up with nice little user interfaces to do it. Could be buttons in a big dialog box, or maybe a font DA mover style thing to move name components around. There are all sorts of possibilities. But from a programmer perspective, if in each major programming language, I knew that if I go to the Visual Meta GitHub repository, I can find the C example, the C++ example, the JavaScript example, plug that library into my thing and just call those methods.
Peter,
then we localize that problem of building the correct Visual Meta formatting to one location where if something goes wrong, we can fix it, and the fix will automatically propagate the next time people update their libraries and their code. Otherwise, you have a million programmers trying to individually implement Visual Meta and potentially getting it wrong and busting things.
yeah, that's fair enough, but we still have to have a specified format of doing this, no matter how it's arrived at. And at least for the opportunity we're discussing now and looking at, this will be done manually. It may even be done by me manually. We need what I'm thinking is, yes, you're right, that the last name is really important, because that's usually done for alphabetical listings and nonsense like that, right? But if we do something like I've shown in the chat, this is how I write my name. We use the comma just to make sure we delineate, because it could be like Van space Dam. Maybe that's divided. As long as there's no comma between them, we know that Van Dam is the last name. Just make it really, really simple. And then we use something that would never be in the names field, plus or whatever, to divide or separate.
But should it be compatible with the ordinary BibTeX software?
Yeah, that would be. I think the problem here is you need. We would the original start point using the BibTeX is it was human readable, albeit not necessarily strictly grammatical things, and so it was textual and human readable, and it had a known and defined format. My slight worry bead here is in well-intentioned simplification, we just shoved the problem elsewhere. My gut feeling is that we would do better to stick within one of the BibTeX conventions, and if we needed to make it easier, I can't remember who it was, whether it was Animal Peter, someone anyway mentioned that, well, yeah, if we had to produce an aid, if you knew what you needed to put in, but you weren't entirely sure how to do that, we could probably turn the thing on its head and say, look, put last name here or last sortable name here or whatever, and it could be done, because that's that is again a known problem. But I do think that having a textual canonical form of at least a known format at this point, because that also would be your hinge point in later time to reach to the sort of things that Peter's been mentioning. In other words, anything could look at the base.
Yeah, okay.
The baseline canonical reference and hinge over it.
Right. Please, everyone, have a look at the link that I just sent there, the one to Visual Meta. Or actually, I'm going to share screen. We'll do it together. So what I'm thinking about is we're trying to balance two different things. One is to have a rock solid and one to have a compatible, right? So maybe what we should do is describe author in the way that it is currently with BibTeX, but because of the issues we've discussed, maybe we have another field called author plus that most BibTeX will just ignore, but we know this one really follows a solid style. I'm not saying this is the way to do it, but can we define something like this together?
Well, I mean, as I say, BibTeX, I know because I had to use them in some of my citation recently, does deal with prenominals, postnominals, and all these other odd, weird variants. And it has it has a thing for that. Now, a lot of people won't know that, so we might need to map from one to the other. But my gut feeling is to stick with something that at least is an established format at the moment, because otherwise what we're doing is it's the old, well, let's have another standard. I know that's good intent, but my gut feeling is that's going to bite us in due course.
Yeah, but I don't think you're right, because when I type in BibTeX standard for author names, I get all kinds of help me, help. How do we use it? Help. So clearly it's
that's just bad. But the documentation is there. It's just badly advertised, and it's not, people, and a lot of people don't, instead of looking at the documentation, they just type in, if it's not on the first page in Google, type help. That doesn't mean it's not there and it's not well.
Instead of solving the world's problems over a glass of wine, can you just show me where it is? I would be very happy if it is quite strong and it exists. I'd be extremely happy to paste it right.
Oh, I haven't. It's not in the front of my mind at the moment. I have to squirrel away and look for it. I mean, it's not how my mind holds these things. So I've been, doing it as a live demo. No, but it is because I've had to go and look it up. The problem with BibTeX is just that it's been really badly curated. It's a common problem of open projects. So lots of people doing lots of good work, but no one has stepped up to be the curator and keep it meaningfully organized for people to find stuff. But that's a whole different ballgame.
Okay, so someone will give this to me soon. Is that what you're saying? Maybe you. Okay, so we don't not need another field. This problem is solved.
I believe so. I just think we're because otherwise you're now effectively making yourself the curator and the person who's got to fix all the problems when something comes out of
yeah, but Mark, don't forget the opportunity we're looking at here. That is what we do manually. People will be giving us their manuscripts, and we will be putting it in this format. So we want to be BibTeX readable, no question. But where there are issues, for instance, most of them only have year. But for the kind of work we want to do, we want a finer granularity. So that's why it's optional have date equals as opposed to year equals, right? So I know there's a lot of great stuff in BibTeX that I'm not really conversant in myself. So I'll be very, very happy as long as it is rock solid. Because the key thing about Visual Meta is, of course, who wrote it, what's the title, and when. Yeah. And the fact that we're having a long discussion on who wrote it shows how important this work is.
Yeah. But I mean, in terms of if it's easier for someone, to enter their name as, first name, middle names, last name, and prenominal, postnominal, that sort of in boxes, and it all turns up magically as BibTeX, because most people don't got to read that BibTeX. That it's there and it's understood in a format, and code already exists for understanding that. So my worry bead is we'd actually be taking a step back, because people would now have to write a method to understand our use of the names, which might be easy to read by eye, but would sort of stick us like kibosh on our opening premise of making this accessible to machines.
But we do have the problem of period being used for junior period and things like that, and to delineate. What is the
well, you put
and.
Yeah, well, you put
the word and right now.
The convention, as I recall, is basically you put internal curly brackets, because it's if you think, I think the easiest way to think about it is akin. I'd be as simple as I can put it. It's a bit like an Excel spreadsheet. If you want to tell Excel do this bit before you do the next bit, so you put the JR dot in something that says this is one slug of something.
Okay,
This is not an abbreviation.
you and Adam are disagreeing on this point.
I mean, I would go with the the latest. I'm 20 years back. So
and what about the Norwegian word for duck? And. A-N-D.
yeah, that will kill everything. So if you have a duck as an author, it will really.
So we call this the duck problem. Okay. But okay, Mark, can we?
What if we prefix all the delimiters with a symbol? Maybe at period for a period that we want to be meaningful to BibTeX, and then any other period, they're just an extraneous period that's part of how the name was being constructed. So commas that we want to be picked up in Visual Meta could be at commas, and you could have at period.
Okay, well, here we have in this tug, we have the and, Karl-Heinz and. I mean, that's something that would be readable, right? I mean, we want this to be readable by any BibTeX parser, ideally. We just go with.
Should it be? And if it's lowercase and, are there any duck named with lowercase and? Maybe we get to.
I will go away and look at this. It's not the kind of thing to sort of do off the cuff. But I genuinely believe, unless having had a deeper look that I found otherwise, I think most of this problem has been addressed in one form or another in BibTeX. It may be for convenience that within our BibTeX we slightly changed the way in which they're visually styled, but I think this is something we don't have to redo, because it is complex. It's more. Every time I look at this, I find something else that's just made it. Someone will come up with a name that's just difficult.
Maybe the and could be cap locked, just to distinguish it between an and that's a part of the name. So if it's and in all uppercase, then you'd know, that's stringing a couple entries together. If it's a lowercase and, that's a part of the name, because there's so many names that have and built in. Certainly corporate names have and in them all over the place. So using and as the delimiter is, in my opinion, a poor choice if you're dealing with anything that might have corporate authorship leaking in.
But I'm pretty sure that as I say, there are ways that you, and I go back to the analogy of nested using parentheses inside an Excel formula. In BibTeX, that appears to be the way in which you say, well, when you get to this bit, don't parse within this. And so in the right place, the wrong at, and in the wrong place would therefore not be misunderstood as an and join. It would be understood as this is a term.
Mark, is it your experience that most BibTeX parsers or software understand the nested brackets?
I wouldn't be qualified to say, but I mean, at some point, I think, the thing is, we need to sort of push towards a standard, and it's easy to try and collapse that onto something that is known and make plain that that's what you expect to see. There is a problem at the moment in the BibTeX world, because a number of people are they're using Fred Smith and something. And if I recall, that's not how you do it. If you want to say Fred Smith, I think you do Fred Smith, comma, Joe Blogs. So which is when they mix two things, that's when most of it breaks. That's why you don't want to allow people options, because they just won't follow the rules.
So I've updated the page, taking into account, I think, what you guys have said. However, as a dictator, more because I'm a dick than a tater, we don't need to work on this anymore now, because what you've shown is no simple solution to this, and that's fine, because if this goes ahead, we will of course be discussing this with those people, So they will have their very clear opinion. So, you know, we've gone through a really, really useful exercise and reminding ourselves of the need to clean this up. So that's all very jolly good. What?
Is there any kind of a standards body that has ownership over the BibTeX format?
Good question. Well asked. I don't know. I mean, I seriously, I'm not an expert in BibTeX. I've just blunted my brain against it enough recently to know there's something reasonable there, and you know, it's really just, it has this messiness, like a lot of open projects. You know, so you can take it two ways. You can either say, oh, it's not beautiful and polished, therefore it's rubbish, or say, well, like, you know, there are gems hiding in there. We just got to sort of dust them off a bit. And I think I tend towards the latter.
I'm going to stop the recording unless anyone else wants anything else on recording.
No. While you're doing that, and for people who don't want books, you can look away now, but for Adam, I found it. In a way, you could say it's looking through, it's a bit like Bertin's Semiology of Graphics. Yes, he looks at his bookcase. I thought you might.
Yeah, I got it somewhere.
I won't go and get that out. Yeah. Yep, that's the one. Yeah.
Because we're doing books. There's a really beautiful bit in a book I want to show you. It's a tiny book, like these little kind of guided.
Yeah.
Because I thought this was really interesting, because hermeneutics is basically a fancy word for reading stuff to find stuff out, right? Or research. But it has here this cartoon.
That was the Derek Zoolander description. Yep.
Yeah. You know, and it talks about how people complain about people texting too much rather than communicating. And it says, well, that's basically a description of the humanities. You know, it is discussions via text, not phone text, but it is text. And I just thought that was probably the quote I'm going to put in the beginning of my PhD paper. Right, I will stop the recording for